Hello there. I'm super excited to share with you this new novel I've published, The Greatest Prophecy. Without further ado, this is the book cover. And in terms of image credits, I created this cover. And you can find me on thegreatestprophecy.blogspot.com, and my Instagram as well is here. And all author royalties from this book until January 10th will be donated to an organization I care a lot about, and you can find information about that organization at the blog spot, so that's a good resource. Here's a little spoiler-free summary. As societies evolve, so do their challenges. In the town of Greensburg of a futuristic United States, still called the United States, yes, a group of teens find their lives irreversibly linked when a 17-year-old boy named Shadow, and I explain why his name is Shadow in the novel, starts an orchestra to bridge the divide growing between the social classes, and also as a gesture of welcoming those of the society referred to as quote-unquote the marked. And I also explain who those marked are. They're a specific group of people, and they have a really significant role in the development of the themes in the novel. A belief in the transcendent potential of music encourages him, but change turns out to be fragile, because a close friend of Shadow's finds herself, along with some other teens, called to participate in an ambiguous government-sponsored program, one that will change their lives forever, and it will elucidate the brutal realities of the world, the cost of hatred and intolerance, ultimately determining whether they will have the strength to resist an oppressive society, their own fears, ignorance, prejudices. Sounds like a lot. I do put a lot of these themes in there. Definitely a lot about beliefs, prejudices, government oppression. This is a dystopian, so there's a lot of those themes. And I will go more into these thematic topics here. One of the most major thematic topics in the story is immigration and how a society built on xenophobic attitudes balances the economic advantages gained through immigrant presence while also keeping them as lower class citizens due to the government's fear of them challenging the system or providing new ideas. So it's this really interesting thing of like, yes, the government wants people to migrate and work, let's say, lower wages in order to still have some services that need to be provided, and also have a workforce that's willing to do those, let's say, less desirable jobs or harder jobs. They are kept from higher economic service occupations like being a doctor, teacher, or lawyer, so they won't be in a position to make a significant difference to the system. And also the identity aspect. Who are we? What does it mean to be human? This is another big part of the story. There are questions the main characters struggle to answer, as the novel introduces the idea that our humanness doesn't actually define us. Oh, and this is interesting. It mentions how actually real science proves that the physical world is not like the end all of individuality, and our biology doesn't define or limit us. Now, I don't offer really deep scientific insight, but I do mention a lot of, or to a degree, I mention epigenetics. This is not necessarily a new field of biology, but it's definitely gained a lot of momentum. And so over the years, it's a really cool aspect of science that I introduce here, basically talking about how our genes can be influenced by the environment. So this is like a really interesting concept that we're not so defined by the genes we're born with. Like, so many things about us can change, and our genetic expression can change as we experience the world and the environment we're in. And definitely, I would say a good resource if you want to learn more about epigenetics is The Biology of Belief by Bruce Lipton. Really good resource if you want to learn more about him. But this is a big part of the story as well, is really what does it mean to be human, and even science that proves that we're not so defined by our genes that make us human as we may have thought before. So, and then social hierarchy. The novel explores how those in power justify this stratification of society, and the book imagines a future in which the traditional middle class becomes increasingly rare and almost impossible to achieve for some. It explores how a capitalist country must use tools of oppression to ensure a stable economy for the few on top, to the point of eschewing technological innovations to ensure the working class doesn't ascend in economic sectors. Okay, that's a lot of things in one, but basically, it's the idea that in order to maintain kind of an elite on top, there's certain fields that don't receive technological innovations to keep workers like in factories, and certain groups of people still working in factories, even if those jobs can, let's say, already be done by robots, or they don't need necessarily people to work on. They like to keep, the government makes sure that the lower class kind of remains in those lower economic sectors. So that's another point that's really important in the world building. And gender roles. The book displays and challenges the gender roles of men and women, as well as the two often reasoning the two sexes have inherent emotions and dispositions indispensable to their gender. And I argue like for societal influence as like the main contributor to certain behavioral and occupational differences. Yeah, this is a really nuanced topic. There's not really like an answer to this idea of gender roles, but I definitely challenge a lot of that. So hobbies, for example, that may seem like more suited for women, actually one of the male main characters kind of engages in them. And also like the emotional responses, like we have this idea that men cannot be so emotional, or they shouldn't be that emotional as we would expect women to be. But I kind of challenge those ideas, and I share how the society is almost intolerant of these ideas even though they're present. So this is a big theme in the story. So I definitely challenge these gender roles. And human rights, this is basically maybe the overarching theme. Like over everything that I covered so far, human rights kind of sits above everything. Huge emphasis throughout the entire novel. I address rights of immigrants, minorities, lower classes, women, even men. Yes, they have rights too. So I know there's a lot of emphasis on women's rights. There is emphasis on men's rights as well, especially the influence of society on young men. I explore that as well. And how society can be, whether wittingly or unwittingly. So yes, the government does things oppressively on purpose, but even like higher class people or not higher class people sometimes are oppressive to each other, and it's really kind of interplay within the society. And the greatest danger lies in the fact that some may not even realize they're being oppressed in some way. So it's not just the government acting like oppressive. Even within the society, there are interactions between the classes and within certain classes that show that some people may not even realize that they're being limited. Especially the upper class, they think they're not being limited, but in some ways they are. So that's also a theme as well, or a topic. And so while this novel is dystopian, there are quite some things that remain the same. And I like to do this. So if you're familiar with, let's say, the Hunger Games, their nation is the country of Panem. It's renamed Panem. It's no longer the United States, even though in the description of the Hunger Games says that it used to be the place called North America. So I like to include this because I like to know what elements of the novel remain true to the present moment while still obviously being dystopian. So in my book, there's still a Congress and a Senate, and there's a president. There's departments and cabinets as part of the executive branch, and certain cities and places like Carnegie Hall in New York are still real. It's still called New York, it's still called Carnegie Hall, and it serves like same purpose. And of course, it's still called the United States. The country is still the United States. And a couple symbolisms and devices. Music. Music is a huge part of the story and influences the lives of the main characters greatly, since most of them are musicians. Music affects social relationships, self-image, ultimately also the cause of both the joy and suffering for the characters. So yeah, music is a big thing. Like Shadow creates an orchestra, and that orchestra really drives honestly a lot of the plot, I'd say, especially in the beginning. And then blue jays. So blue jays are the only species of birds that remain in the woods surrounding the town of Greensburg. This is where our main characters live. And I explain the reason for that. They are songbirds, but communicate more than sing. So they don't necessarily have songs that, like the way we would imagine bird songs. They use a lot of like chirps and communicating signals to communicate with each other rather than sing in the traditional sense, like a songbird usually would, like a mockingbird. And so they play the role of messengers as well as the bringers of joviality. Lucy's one of the characters, she has a major affinity to the birds, and they take on many different meanings for her and other characters throughout the story. Okay, the Institute. This is really important. Institute is a government building, and yet it also is symbolic of the greater society as a whole. And the events that play out in it are in some ways a microcosm of the society, of the greater society, the United States. Therefore, references to the Institute can be interpreted as referring to the country, both the government and its citizens. So it really just serves as a microcosm of the greater country, and very important things happen in there. And finally, the program. So the program is really connected to the climax of the story, as while revealing it would be a major spoiler, what I can say is it is a government-run program. It's called the program. It's a government-run activity that aims to establish a permanent social order through scientific innovations. So that's all I'm going to say. You can play with that ideas how much you want, but that's what vaguely the program is. Okay, this is my favorite part. Favorite books that inspired parts of the novel. A lot of classics. Basically all these like classes. I love classics. And certain thematic topics, themes from these novels inspired parts of my book. So if you really enjoyed all or some of these, you may enjoy parts of my book. So I'll say like the idea of government manipulation of information. President George Orwell's 1984 can be kind of seen in my story. Of course, Handmaid's Tale, women's right to make their own choices, definitely also part of my story as well. I really enjoyed that. Frankenstein. So this one's a little more vague, but the idea of like nature versus nurture, which I guess could bring on that whole epigenetics argument that I said earlier, also quite present in the novel, especially after the climax. This will be really important. Catcher in the Rye, even, especially when I deal with issues of like Shadow is our main male character, and like how he's dealing with how society expects him to be and how he does see it almost as if it's fake, like the way the main character in The Catcher in the Rye sees everything as like phony in some way. And also this book, Catcher in the Rye, focuses a lot on like the loss of innocence, trying to preserve that innocence, and that in some ways also kind of present in my book. Scarlet Letter, it's has like the themes of like the effect of public shaming and stigma. That actually really is really present in the novel, especially how, but again, the government seeks to kind of oppress certain groups, call out certain groups. So the idea of shaming, publicly shaming, is a big part of the novel. And Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the idea of the duality of human nature is present in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and it's really present in my novel as well, because it explores a lot about what makes someone evil. Is anyone truly ever evil? That's kind of explored a little bit. And also within the main character's own internal conflicts, this is also seen. And Lord of the Flies. So Lord of the Flies has themes on, you would say, maybe herd mentality or savagery versus civilization. And this is kind of vaguely in my book with the idea of like how the government seeks to maintain order, but maybe through maintaining that order, they create some sort of disorder. So there's a kind of balance between maintaining order while also maybe risking disorder. And of course, herd mentality, the idea that you want to follow the group. So that's also present in my novel as well. But I would highly recommend all these books. These are all 5 stars for me. Representation. This is really important. I always love to see books that represent other groups of people besides white protagonists. So definitely made an effort to include as many groups as I could, and definitely some of the main characters are from these races and ethnic groups. So among them include Hispanic and Latina, African, Black, Native American, Chinese, and Indian. So all of these groups are in some ways present through the characters in the novel. There's also disability representation. One of the characters is dyslexic, the other is deaf. And yes, so there's also that. What is different? I wanted to add us in. If this is starting to sound like a regular YA book, it, yeah, a lot of YA books, there's the idea of like, okay, oppressive government, and then there's probably going to be a revolution. And yeah, there is an oppressive government, but there's a little different in what I do. Unlike the majority of YA books, the oppression of characters is not solved simply by replacing the government leaders. It's not so simple as like, oh, we'll just get rid of the president or like whoever's in the Congress or making decisions. Because the citizens of the country, in large part, are responsible for the issues. They kind of, in some ways, agree with the government and they play into that. And this makes a revolution, like in the traditional sense that you would see in like Divergent or Hunger Games or other dystopian novels, is because it's not really possible because the enemies of the protagonists are just not those in the government, like only. Regular citizens help propagate the government's agenda. So it's like there's not really an enemy. It's like their own friends or people around them could be helping, could be part of the quote unquote issues that they're facing. So it's not so easy to just rise up. It's really is not that easy for them. So this makes the enemy, quote unquote, much more elusive, especially when not everyone may be who they seem. So this goes back to the idea of like the duality of like human nature. Like, is anyone really like evil? Like, there's really not a pure evil character in this book that we're supposed to like hate necessarily. It's really like everyone's really complex. So that's one thing I wanted to add here. Right, we reached the end. Thank you so much for watching. These two characters here, Beaky and Whiskers, are two little animal friends that are a big part of the novel. I mean, they don't show up that much, but they definitely really help create the themes in the novel as well. So those are little cute pictures there. And here's my Amazon author page if you'd like to check that out. And yeah, thank you again so much for your time watching.